All right, we're live. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for this. You can share the link now if you want in the chat. The new one. We're live. My name's Sean Johnson Andrews, and I'm your host. I'm the immediate past president of the Cultural Studies Association, and I'm broadcasting from the north side of Chicago. So thanks for joining us for this bonus episode of Breaking Culture Live. This is an experiment in scholarly communication, attempting to bring activist and academic insights to contemporary events. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by Bryan Alexander, who was scheduled to join us yesterday but had a conflict. So I'm really pleased to be able to chat with him today. Bryan Alexander is an internationally known futurist, researcher, writer, speaker, consultant, and teacher working in the field of how technology transforms education. He's a senior scholar at the moment at Georgetown University, where he teaches graduate seminars in learning, design, and technology. Through his consulting firm, Bryan Alexander Consulting, he consults throughout higher education in the United States and abroad. He also speaks widely, publishes frequently with articles appearing in venues such as the Atlantic Monthly, Inside Higher Ed. His most recent books include Universities on Fire, Higher Education in an Age of Climate Crisis, which I hope to be able to talk a little bit about at some point. And that was winner of the 2025 Frederick W. Ness Book Award. Congratulations. And your forthcoming book, this is coming out soon, right? The Peak Higher Education.
Yeah, it's scheduled January 1st or so.
Okay. How to Survive the Emerging Academic Crisis, which is advice we all need, both with Johns Hopkins University Press. He's researched and written extensively on the topic of AI in education, which is our main topic for today. Some of that's available on his Substack, AI Academia and the Future. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Bryan and I worked together briefly at the National Institute for Technology and Liberal Education. It's
Indeed.
been over a decade now. That was 2011 to 2013.
Yeah.
Uh, and we also did some work on scanning futures at that point. Uh,
Mhm.
so I wonder, as we, before we kind of get started, I wonder if you want to tell us a little bit about what that means. A lot of the audience are um, kind of maybe more conventional academics, but you bring academic tools and methodologies to talk about the future. You want to tell us about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for hosting me, Sean, and hello to everybody on the stream. It's good to see you all, and hopefully to hear from you all. I mean, a futurist in general helps people think more creatively and strategically about the future. And we have a lot of methods for doing so. Environmental scanning is one that's very popularly used, and it does more or less what it says. You take a look at developments in the horizon, looking for signs and signals of potential futures. There are a lot of methods that go into this. For example, you have to try to scan multiple domains. You have to definitely make a point of getting diverse points of view and contested points of view. Um, but one of the great results of that is you get to look at, well, seeds of the future. And it's a form of documentation, building evidence. So you get a sense, you can point to this. It's not pure speculation. And then you can build upon horizon scanning. You can use horizon scans to identify trends, which you can then use to build trend analysis. You can use them to build scenarios and more. I find horizon scanning is best done as a social practice where multiple people with multiple points of view get to work together. That's why I advise college campuses to set up ad hoc groups or committees to do this.
And you also talk with a lot of leaders and faculty across the country, across the world, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I mean, that's a
so,
a key part of my practice. I really believe, first of all, in conversation, which I run a weekly video conference program called the Future Trends Forum, which we're coming up on our 10th anniversary, which is pretty remarkable.
well,
But I really believe in that kind of in conversation as a way of helping us think about the future, through back and forth, through questions, through disagreements, through just bringing multiple points of view to bear, I think is really powerful. I also I'm always looking for feedback in the classic sense. I want to be able to hone my practice, so I'm constantly asking people on social media, through other parts of the internet, and in person. I give a lot of talks. I go to a lot of events, and I'm constantly checking to see what I can learn, which I think is just very good practice. It's a very anti-romantic practice in that sense. I'm not trying to be a solitary figure, making this work. But also, higher education, especially in the United States, is a strange beast in that it's very disintegrated. It's very disorganized. David Larrabee has a book on this where he calls higher education a perfect mess, and it's quite true. Roughly, there's been a guy who counted between 3 and 4,000 colleges, universities, and similar institutions. So trying to keep up with what's going on across all of them is extremely challenging. So one of the privileges of my position is that I get to interview people, formally and informally, from all parts of academia, from presidents to faculty, librarians, students, trying to understand what's happening. So yeah, there's a very, very social component to this.
And I mean, I think as we all kind of look at something like AI, it's also very easy to
Hmm.
get into our little bubbles, or kind of imagine that what
Hmm.
we're seeing in our neck of the woods or in our kind of area happens to be like the thing that everyone else is thinking.
Hmm.
And that gets amplified by the social media feeds that we're on, which also tend to be populated by many of the same people that we already interact with.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I think Pariser's idea of the filter bubble is quite true. So on the algorithmic side, the technological side, but then as you point out, there's also a very human side where, uh, especially to the extent that one feels oneself under threat or that um, one feels oneself in a polarized situation, you might want to select for people that are aligned with you in certain ways, and then deselect for people who are not. Uh, and it's very important practice to go beyond that. And I get static for it. On Facebook, for example, I regularly get DMs from people who say, you should shut down this person. Um, and yet I think it's very important to, as they say in Ghostbusters, to cross the streams.
Across the street. Um, uh, well, so I was noticing, I mean, and another thing that you're also doing is looking at sort of the business press. And so, as if we're talking about AI to kind of move into that space, I mean, there's a few things that stood out in your most recent scan of AI, the AI economy, or kind of, I guess
Hmm.
it's what you called it, the autumnal AI economy, looking at just what's going on in higher education, but also kind of in AI in general. And a couple of things stood out to me in that scan. One was that in the Microsoft survey of how people are actually using AI in the workplace, it's mostly for information retrieval, right? And that so that's in a lot of ways it seems like AI is just sort of
Yeah,
being used instead of search in a lot of cases, and that this was also one of the things that even AI was asking. OpenAI was asking AI what their business model should be. Right? It was sort of this very strange recursive moment. And you
I
quote
love
one
that.
Bloomberg reporter saying that this is like saying we will create God and then ask it for money.
I
Um,
love that. I love that.
and so and this is a route of yesterday we had a lot of discussion about the political economy of the AI industry. So what do you see kind of going on there, and how does the sort of hype around it relate to what you see as kind of maybe is there any way to know what's really going on? I think maybe is a better way to ask this.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, just to take one quick step back for viewers and listeners, on my Substack, one of the things I do is I do some environmental scanning on AI, and I tend to break that down by domain. So I do a scan for AI and politics, AI and culture, which is where I think of Sean, AI and education, and technological developments and so on. I try and do these pretty regularly. And so what we're talking about is when I scan on economics, which is wild. I mean, it's very, very complicated, very extensive, as well as very fast moving. And as you said at the end, it can be very difficult to get a sense of what's really going on. Um, the talk is all the bubbles and different kinds of bubbles. And there's a lot of talk about historical precedents. So are we in a bubble like the dot-com bubble around 2000, where we get a short-lived collapse followed by continued build-out? Are we in a bubble situation like the railroads in America in the 19th century, where you get repeated busts, but the build-out created infrastructure which could then be used later on? I mean, the model I like is the Bitcoin model, where you get repeated, boom and bust, very kind of wavery different technology, along with the technology having an unsavory reputation. But we do know, you spoke about this yesterday, there's a huge amount of money flooding into AI, hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. And Carlana Perez, in her great work on technology and finance capital, urges us to think about a necessary step. And Regis, if you haven't read her book, Perez's book is superb. She develops a really good model for how finance capital intersects with technology from the past 200 years. So she looks at multiple
Well,
industrial revolutions. And there's a key phase she identifies, which is after all the excitement, after all the build out, the capital investment of all kinds wants to get a return. And if the return is not forthcoming, then the technology and its implementation changes. You could think about it as an act of discipline. You could think about it as an act of practical business, but the process remains. So this is something that I've been calling for about a year and a half and expecting to see, especially in companies like Google, which aren't shy about massacring their services. Um, but we should expect to see that, because there is no good business model for this right now. There are weird improv propped up models, like
yeah,
NVIDIA and OpenAI partnering with each other. And there's the classic freemium model, which almost all AI services now offer. But they're not making a profit on this. I mean, OpenAI is losing tens of billions a year, as far as we can tell. I don't think Microsoft or Google is experiencing a massive uptick in paid subscriptions to Office 360, for example, because they're adding AI to them, and they're paying out horrendous amounts of money to set this up. So we should expect a lot of business model innovation happening. People trying ads, people trying new tiers. Licensing is something to follow to see, how licensing operates as a result of this. But it's possible that we're in a bubble, the bursting of which will be just vast and catastrophic, especially for the United States, because depending on how you count it, uh, almost all of the GDP growth that's happening
right.
this year is happening in AI. So if you subtract that, we may enter a kind of European level of stagnation. Uh, I mean, I'm speaking in very abstract and statistical terms, but of course, all of this has brutal impacts on human lives. Everyone from the people who work in AI to the people who depend on them. And of course, if we enter recession or just stagnation, the roiling impacts of this across the economy ripple and ricochet back and forth. Now, it's possible that it is not a bubble. It's possible that we might see a market correction. So we may see, OpenAI get dinged a bit. We may see Microsoft and Google change their operations. But we may just see continued growth of this. Um, I'm going on a bit.
No, well, I mean, one of the stats that you mentioned is 92% of GDP this year is from AI related capital investment, which doesn't sound like a diversified economy in any
Well,
way.
no,
It's a
it's
it's
I
it's
mean
a
partly because nothing else is exciting venture capital as much as this. I shouldn't say
yeah,
venture capital. I should say investment capital of all kinds.
sure.
Um, but also, I mean, the U.S. economy is running into all kinds of problems. I mean, one of them, the biggest one being tariffs, which are having all kinds of unpredictable fallout and knock-on effects. We also are continuing to suffer from inflation, although it's hard to tell because the federal government is no longer publishing those statistics. And if they resume, we might not count them as reliable as before. Plus, there's a lot of uncertainty regarding not just the tariffs, but multiple levels of federal behavior, everything from Trump administration threats to the Federal Reserve Board to various geopolitical tensions. So that makes the whole economy start to seize up.
Yeah.
Where I live in Northern Virginia, this is data center heaven. I bike to the gym in the morning, about 3 miles, and I pass, 5 data centers right now. And it's kind of a feature of our landscape. And again, there are a lot of voices saying this is about to collapse. This is a house of cards. I mean, there's a title of one book, The AI Con, for example.
Yeah.
But I think there is actually a lot of value to AI. It's pretty established that it provides a lot of value. We can talk about that. We
Yeah.
can hedge and outline it, but I think it's clearly providing utility to a lot of people. And it's a real question how we continue to pay for it.
Yeah, I was sort of laughing this morning because I'd seen a clip of uh not that I watch this regularly, but maybe I should just for the sake of watching it. But there was a clip from the Joe Rogan Experience yesterday, and evidently Perplexity is now one of their sponsors on this
Hmm,
show.
didn't know that.
Uh, and so they were having sort of a moment of where they needed a moment of critical thinking. um, they had found out that the Democrats had voted to release the Epstein files, and this perplexed them, I guess, and so they
Perplex
suggested
them? That's pretty
yeah.
good.
So they asked the Perplexity about this, and what I found interesting about that moment was that it's a training moment. It's sort of training your
Mm,
viewers. This
yes.
is what you would use AI for. It's not the information retrieval. It's actually critical thinking, which I don't know, actually kind of horrifies me and a little bit more. But that there is that sort of training that we're doing for the culture. Um, so I mean, as we think about this related to higher education, and that's something we sort of talked a little bit about yesterday, but it seems one of the things you mentioned is that we have a range of tensions and values, that the divide over AI within colleges and universities persists. We have implementations and oppositions happening at the same institutions within the same fields. And I think as we were talking yesterday or over the last few days, this really reminds me of the time when we worked at Nightly back in 2011 to
Mm,
13,
mm,
where there was this moment where there was a craze over massively open online courses or MOOCs,
hmm hmm
like those being taught by a handful of computer science
hmm
professors like Sebastian Thurn. Ironically, the landmark course he was offering, which they declared was enrolling 30,000 students at once,
hmm
was Introduction to Artificial Intelligence.
hmm
That was
hmm
that was the and so for the next few years, there was this huge interest in that space, right? And it was all gonna be disrupting higher education. There was Coursera and a few other startups that started at this moment. Collectives of universities like edX claimed
hmm
that they would soon be displacing the traditional degree granting institutions, and the students would soon be relying on free and open courses that they would take with tens of thousands of other students. And so this sort of reminded me of one of your scenarios for, like, it was called AI EDU, I think,
hmm hmm
from Inside Higher Ed, I believe, was where this piece, and it kind of echoes this belief in technology fueled disruption of higher education. um, and on the other hand, you kind of note that there's this whole other group of people arguing that we should basically have no more technology in the classroom. This what you call a retro campus,
Yes.
where everything is on paper. There's no phones. There's only books in the library, and maybe we have digital typewriters. So so aside from all the indicators of it being a bubble, what do you see as promising here in the space of higher ed? What's ludicrous, or better, like in your conversations and scanning of the country, what do you think educate other educators seem to see?
Well, it's a pretty widespread of reactions right now, and I think, I mean, I've been doing a lot of work with this, in part through the American Association of Colleges and Universities. I'm now in the second year of an institute they do on AI, which involves hundreds of colleges and universities across the country, each sending a team to the institute to work on AI implementation and policy at their campus. So it gives me a really great look into what's actually happening on the ground. And it seems that there is I think the claim for hype is pretty overstated in higher ed for AI. I think there's a lot of interest and a lot of concern about AI. But I don't see a lot of cheerleaders saying, "Yeah, this is going to be awesome. This is going to be great." Uh, what I see mostly on the ground is a lot of campus leaders. So, talking about provosts, deans, chancellors, presidents, as well as for private institutions, board members, as well as for public institutions, some state politicians, urging engagement with AI for multiple reasons. They may be thinking about it in terms of job preparation. So, based on models either that jobs will be transformed or replaced, destroyed, and new jobs created. And at any rate, colleges and universities have to prepare students for that post-AI world and the post-AI labor force. Sometimes it has to do with just grappling with a historical development. So thinking about how to prepare students for a world shaped by AI. So this is where AI literacy comes in, and then there's also this sense of kind of defensive literacy, how
Right.
to prepare students for a world where the reshaping by AI has many costs and problems. So, which we can dive into, which you talked about a bit yesterday, which I think are pretty well known. And then there's also another reason to engage, which is the fact that whatever policy a campus takes, whatever stances individual faculty members take, that AI is generally accessible to students, and then as a result, that shapes what they do. So in part, we could think about that as the specter of AI cheating, which is right now completely uncontrolled. We could also think about it as some of the potential larger implications for AI on learning. I often hear this described as the removal of beneficial friction. That if I'm going to be writing a paper in your class about Stuart Hall, and I'm struggling with this and trying to understand cultural studies, and I'm really pushing and working on this, that pushing, that working, that friction is beneficial to me. That gives me
Right.
knowledge. But then if I simply ask, Gemini to cough up an essay on keywords, and it does, then I miss that friction. So I think all of those reasons really push colleges and universities at the leadership level to engage. And I think also quite a few faculty members, as well as support staff, have similar concerns and similar interests, depending on the nature of their work. So campus librarians, for example, might be really interested in developing information literacy into this direction. Faculty members in writing programs, either full-time writing or doing writing across the curriculum, will be thinking about the impact of this on writing, and biologists and so on. I think there are also a good number of opponents, and they usually tend to come out of the humanities, and they mount a wide range of criticism, a lot of which I think, again, is pretty well known, thinking about the general social impact of AI. I mean, you discussed this yesterday to some extent, so I don't need to rehearse it. But also, there's resistance to AI in terms of how it plays out on campus. So again, there's the fear of teaching, there's the fear of lack of benevolent friction. But also, I think some of the resistance sees AI in a broader context. Some of the faculty members that I've been listening to and talking with describe it as the last straw for them. They've dealt with technology, digital technology now for n number of years, and this has gone too far. And so what they want to do is retreat from digital technology as a whole, going right back to the retro campus scenario I mentioned before. So
Is
there's a
this
kind of
how widespread? Like how when you say that you've
I
spoken to a lot of how do you have a sense of how
yeah,
widespread that impulse is?
I don't have good data on this. There is no good data on this. There are surveys and polls which give us, some sketch. Chronicle of Higher Ed had one where it looked like roughly 10 to 15% of faculty would be on that resistance side. But we don't have, I mean, one of the challenges of studying AI in higher education is that there isn't much good data. I mean, think about it. If you ask students, are you using AI? We run into the self-reporting nightmare that
Yeah.
social scientists are used to. When you ask students about, or ask anybody about, say, drug abuse or sexuality, or in higher education, and just asking people questions about do you have math phobia? You have all kinds of reasons not to answer truthfully. When it comes to AI, you might want to, if you're a student, say, no, I don't touch the stuff because it looks kind of skeezy. On the other hand, if you're trying to portray yourself as a technologically savvy student, then you'd say,
Sure.
yes, even if you don't. So it's difficult to get a sense of this, but I think it's one reason why we haven't seen a lot of top-down initiatives. Actually, we haven't seen a lot of central policies on AI, because it is contentious. And to a degree, we've been through this before. I mean, some viewers and listeners might remember the battles over Wikipedia, which now seem, quaint, if not laughable in retrospect. You could
Sure.
think of some of the struggles over the LMS or the VLE in the European context, or about social media, mobile devices, and so on. But I think this is perhaps the most contentious I've experienced in my lifetime, most contentious technology on campus. Um, and that is playing out in all kinds of micropolitical ways in individual departments. Uh, and it's important to keep in mind that absent central campus policies or leadership, that means that AI responses at an institution devolve down to individual units, academic
Sure.
departments. And if
Or faculty
departments
members.
that's where it goes next.
Yeah.
And if departments don't have the resources or see themselves having the political capital to make a decision, it devolves to individual faculty members. And keeping in mind the labor economics of American faculty, that means the largest proportion of faculty that are making these decisions are adjuncts who
Yeah.
not only are badly compensated, but they also have no institutional resources to back them up, which is kind of a shambles. And it's also unfair to ask adjuncts to do this. Here is a world historical development. Please handle this, implement this at the point of the spear, and we won't back you up. I mean, this
Sure.
is very, very challenging.
Yeah. I mean, I think even the sort of highlight or the headline problem here of cheating or plagiarism, or not even plagiarism, right? I mean, plagiarism was actually slightly more easy to detect, because you could find where the
Yes.
original text occurred, right? And now we have text that's being generated on a one-off, which makes detecting that much more difficult. And so you don't you, ca- you like even collecting that evidence that you might never been able to report to an honor committee or something like this is
Yeah.
really makes it much easier to just kind of turn your head and say, well, never mind, this is
And
it's
yeah,
fine if that's what they want to do.
if I could just say something about that, I mean, the detectors right now fail. So Turnitin, Chat Zero, they're really awful at this. I mean, they give so many false positives, so many false negatives. It's pretty well established that they struggle with students for whom English is a second language, and I mean, it's a mess. And yet we're invested in them in many ways. But I think it's important also to think about the historical change of what this means in a relationship with information. You mentioned information retrieval a little while ago. I mean, generally speaking, we've got about 600 years of training of treating documents as information retrieval. So, we listen to radio and listen to the songs that are broadcast. We go to a bookstore and pick up books. We Google for something and we find documents, right? Web pages, PDFs, and so on. You go to a podcatcher and you scroll through for channels and individual channels. You pull in individual episodes, and that's what we're trained to do. That's what we're accustomed to do. But generative AI is fundamentally different in that it makes something up from scratch.
Yeah.
And that's when I see people having issues with AI. I don't mean political issues, I mean practical issues. Uh,
Sure.
for example, there was a university which sent out a condolence email to students after a tragedy, and you could tell they had ChatGPT write it because at the end there was text from ChatGPT in it, which they forgot to delete, right? I think part of it is people are used to that information retrieval model, and they're not used to what is in effect a conversational iterative model, and that's much more challenging. It takes a lot more work to learn and how to use. Um,
Yeah.
but I think I mean, this is where, in part, where we learn a great deal from the library world, from its information literacy and digital literacy efforts, which are, thoroughly established and have lots and lots of literature behind it. I think this is also where individual academic departments like media studies and computer science really come in to help us think through this at a kind of formal, immediate level to try to understand how it is that you can best engage with this.
I mean, I think definitely looking to the library, looking to digital literacy. This seems to be the place that uh, colleges that actually begin to implement policies kind of look to those departments, look to those areas of the university to help them set up these policies for sure. Um, I I think when I look at a scenario like the AI EDU, uh, which is it's a model for higher education where in a lot of ways it replaces the faculty member with some sort of AI bot that is going to sort of tutor you as a student. And one of the things that we mentioned yesterday is that there are actually some K through 12 experiments with this down in Texas. There's a school district where they're experimenting with this. Of course, it's funded by some tech billionaire or something. Where you basically don't have students sitting in a classroom. You have them working with some AI tutor to talk to them about some subject area. Um, and all of the sort of hallucinatory elements of AI aside, it seems like the anxieties there and the anxieties that and, some of the anxieties that we're seeing in higher ed have a lot to do with the threat of AI replacing labor or replacing
Hmm.
expertise.
Hmm.
And so it's hard to disentangle this conversation about AI from that larger context of what you're calling peak higher ed. So maybe as we're sort of, maybe that's a thing to sort of move to here at the end, because I think it's hard to talk about AI and even these anxieties about AI outside of a context where there is a really significant threat economically, but also, especially in the United States, politically against the kind of conventional or against higher ed as we've known it for decades.
Um, well said. I mean, I have little to add to that. Actually, you formulated this very well. I mean, the thing that the decades formulation is especially important because in American higher education from about 1982 to about 2012 massively expanded. And this is really, really important for everyone to keep in mind. We have about 30 years, a human generation, where the number of colleges and universities ballooned, where the total number of students going through higher education expanded massively, where we hired more faculty, we hired more staff. I mean, the sector just really grew like mad. And there isn't an accepted historical term for this period yet. Clay Shirky has suggested golden age, and that's not bad. But that's really it's important to keep this in mind because that trains people in academia and around academia to expect that kind of growth. And then that growth stopped. We hit a wall around 2012. And depending on the numbers you've got, total enrollment declined for more than the next decade. Sometimes by small amounts, 1% a year, sometimes by larger amounts, but we dropped significantly. And this really has all kinds of implications for higher education and for America. I mean, first, if you think about higher education as a public good, and some still do, right? If you think that it is valuable. So we send young Sean, to college, and he gets a degree, and he's likely to earn more over his lifetime. We could talk about the numbers about that if you like, but that's good for the local economy. He's going to be healthier physically and mentally, which is good for the local society. He's going to be more likely to participate in civic life and in politics, which we think is a good thing. So this is just a win-win. And that institution, he's also going to contribute to research, and that's good for all, the entire intellectual base of the country and for humanity as a whole. This is all good. And if we retreat from that, that is a serious problem. And this isn't something that's abstract. The United States was committed to the idea of college for everybody. We pushed really, really hard on this. And by pushing, I mean high school counselors trying to advise students into the right college. High school is turning off mandatory shop class and home ec in order to expand the preparation for academia. I'm talking about this as a bipartisan thing too. Democrats and Republicans alike joined in this idea. And then that idea seems to have broken up. There's no replacement consensus for that. The idea of college for all, we seem to have just coughed up a hairball on, and now we don't know how we replace it. Do we go back to the 19th century, college for some, Do we shift to a focus on college for STEM plus business plus allied health? There's no consensus that has replaced it yet so far. But on top of this, within higher education, and this is kind of something which is often missing from media coverage of it, is that colleges and universities overwhelmingly rely on student tuition and fees to keep the doors open. We talk about endowments. A vanishingly small number of institutions have endowments of significance, and only some of those actually rely on that for their budget. Instead, the overwhelming majority of campuses need to have students come through the door in order to keep the lights on. And
Yeah.
so if those numbers decline, you see the problem. And we've seen the results of that problem. I've been tracking college closures, college mergers, and the mergers are never for good reasons. I mean, they may be for good reasons, but they're always for institutionally stressed reasons. And also cuts, endless amounts of cuts to faculty, to staff, to academic programs. I mean, I know this has had terrible human toll, which is not really going discussed. But also, it shows just how fragile this enterprise is. Now, I mean, the past couple of years, we've seen some rebound of enrollment, which is almost entirely caused by community colleges teaching high
All
school
right.
students. It's called dual enrollment. We're not
Mm.
seeing a massive America falling in love with liberal education again. Instead, we're stuck in this phase, which puts higher education in a terrible spot. How we get to proceed, how do we remake our case to America? And we can talk as well about the declining value Americans find in higher education as expressed by poll after poll. We can break this down politically. I mean, Republicans are far more skeptical of higher ed than Democrats and independents, but Democrats and independents, two-thirds of America, are also more and more skeptical. So I mean, this is what I've been wrestling with for several years now, is trying to figure out how to take higher education out of this rut, how to turn around our slide down the slope past peak.
Yeah, I mean, I your periodization there, starting with 1982, is an interesting one, because what I also I've seen sort of charts for a long time. Doug Hinwood, had a chart that he pointed to, looking at 1982 as one of the sort of turning points in the public funding of higher education. Right, that this is when we start a sort of transition from it being funded
Yep.
by state,
Yeah.
local, and federal government, and more, it doesn't, the crossover isn't there. I think the crossover is closer to like around 2008, 2012. I forget when it is, when basically more of the college cost of college is funded by tuition than it is by other kinds of public monies. Which, I think that that turning point in 1982 says a lot about where that shift also comes from. Which, my go-to there is to think about issues of equity, issues of race, issues of kind of economic inequality,
Hmm.
because it's in the 70s that we see a sort of turning point where, well, we had a lot of support for public funded goods until it was for, you know people that we were kind of afraid to give an education to, in this case, right? That, there's a sort of famous quote, or quote that I always kind of go back to, that, Terry Eagleton, in his book, I think it's After Theory, talking about the shift in both the American but also some European institutions, opening up the institutions to larger and larger swaths of the public, in part after World War II, and investing in those, and that this created a real, part of that democratic paradox. The more people you get in, the more views you have. It definitely diversifies the information, but it also kind of amplifies the democratic pressure for other forms of equity across the society. And so I see the right wing pressure against the institutions as coming from that side, just as much as it is from whether AI is fascist or not.
Well, man, I have so many thoughts about this, but if I could, if I just lead off with three people. So first of all, you mentioned the great Doug Henwood, and this is a shout out. He's a wonderful podcaster. His Behind the News podcast is one of my automatic listens. I'm a big fan, and he's just also a really thoughtful writer and just a really nice person, and just a big fan. And I recommend that to everybody. it's a powerful argument to make about the change in access. Chris Newfield is a great scholar about this. He has several books talking about the defunding of public higher education. He focuses on California, and he makes the case that California the whole state, I mean, starts admitting more and more students of color, especially Latinos, shifts to a better gender mix, and then women in the majority. And he argues that for conservative politicians and voters in California, this became too much, and that they resisted this. Now, Reagan is the avatar, both in his 1960s governorship when he goes to war against the University of California, but also as president in the 1980s, inaugurating the great, start of neoliberalism in the United States. And there's a lot to say about this. I would add to this mix of great people. Um, Tressie McMillan Cottom. She has a wonderful book, the great first monograph on for-profit higher education called Lower Ed, which I recommend to everybody. I teach this every chance I can. And she makes this really interesting case that for her, I believe, I have to look it up now, the turning point for her is the 1990s. And so this is when neoliberalism becomes massively bipartisan under the Clinton administration, and the Democrats embrace this fully, which they've never really rejected. But she makes the case that we shifted from an emphasis on social services to individuals being responsible through higher education. What I mean is, instead of having, say, Nordic levels of social services, of publicly supported childcare, of healthcare, of education, transportation, and so on, instead we shifted towards a privatized angle for that, and that higher education became key. So if you're a teenager and you're about to enter this neoliberal world without the social safety net that we might expect, well, what you have to do is you have to go to college and you have to get a degree, and that will give you a job, which will enable you to pay for all these services on your own. And so for her, this is the higher education gospel. And
Mm,
this is a song that has been sung very steadily by lots and lots of people. And we are really committed to that. And so, I mean, that's part of think about this as part of the neoliberalism of higher education. But I would add to this the really, really critical thing, and this is what makes higher education in the United States really distinct from higher ed in other countries, is the immense financialization of higher
right.
education, especially through student debt.
Yeah.
The numbers are a little squishy, but we're still approaching $2 trillion in total debt,
Right.
which is staggering to think about. And there's really no sign of that slowing down. Published tuition and fees continue to rise. Actual payment looks to be stabilizing, but we still have people going through and incurring debt, and paying off debt is harder and harder. There's no political consensus to end this. There's no real push to massively change this from within higher education. I mean, we have reorganized and reformatted the American Academy on lines of debt, which
Right.
is a historical development that we really fully haven't grappled with yet.
Yeah, and there's no without a massive public infusion of funds, that doesn't seem to be possibly changing anytime soon.
Well, and
Although
people have been calling for that, but there's I mean, this is what my friend Siva Vaidhyanathan calls for. John Warner has a whole book on this. But there is and Chris Newfield ends one of his books by saying what we need is a cultural revolution where we rethink higher education as a public good, therefore publicly funded. And this all sounds wonderful, and there's zero political traction for it. The Republicans aren't interested. Until Biden actually got in office, the Democrats weren't very interested. Biden tried a few things along the margins, some debt forgiveness, some of which
yeah.
broke down, and of course, and then his administration failed, and we didn't have a successor. And there's no sign of this among the current Democratic Party in all the battles about what to do after the disaster of last year's election and how to confront the disaster of the Trump administration. There's no one beating the drums saying, well, what we really need is federal guarantees for tuition across the country. No one's making that case right now.
Well, maybe we just need to. I haven't tried to ask Perplexity about what to do about this, but maybe that's we haven't asked AI how to solve this problem.
Well, this is if I could go back to something I said earlier, it's really a really good friend of mine, an amazing man who died last year, Cliff Lynch from the Coalition for Networked Information. A brilliant computer scientist, wonderful organizer, just a visionary and a real loss to the community. But for him, he made the case that generative AI is essentially a remix tool. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. People call it a plagiarism tool. I don't think that's precisely correct. It remixes. And so through a remix, you get original materials in different forms and in different ways, and I think when we ask generative AI questions like this, then we're in a sense remixing the internet. Ian Bogost has a paper I've been trying to find for a while, where he said that we should think of generative AI as playing the internet, like an
Mm,
instrument, playing the internet as a remix machine. I mean, this does lead to oracular possibilities, and people treat it that way. I've been seeing cases of this in China where people, of course, China has a rich culture of oracles, and they'll put questions to ChatGPT about their fate, about their potential marriage partner, and so asking it, what we should do, it's going to remix everything that's out there, including some of your writing, Sean, including some of my
sure.
writing.
Well, and that's all made a lot more. It's all facilitated by there being no copyright that they're honoring
Yeah, I
in
mean
those platforms.
that's fascinating. One of the things I've been saying for several years is that generative AI is in many ways very fragile, and one of the reasons is the economic problem we talked about before, but also the intellectual property argument. We have multiple lawsuits in different forms in different places, and the argument that the generative AI companies make that what they're doing is fair use is clearly not going to stand up. But it's interesting that the one settlement that was found against generative AI along copyright was actually for piracy. Through
Right.
an Anthropic settlement was about not the content per se, but the content they got was already pre-pirated, if you will.
Sure.
And so, but this could happen. I mean, to have a judge, respond to Microsoft and say, all right, what you're doing is clearly unauthorized access. It's clearly copyright infringement in scale. Please delete all your weights or OpenAI cease operation. It would be easy for a judge to do. This is one of the things that I've been on tenterhooks about.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Well, I know that there's a lot more that we could talk about, and we haven't really even touched on one of the other main things that you have been writing on, which is the relationship of climate change to the American university. It doesn't seem fair to give you a final, just one final word on that. I don't know if you have anything that you would say other than maybe pay attention to it.
I have one thing to say, which is, my book, University is on Fire, is the first monograph which takes a look at higher education and climate change with an angle to the future. And so there's a lot to say, which is why it's a complete book, right? But right now, ever since Trump's reelection, doing academic climate work is more difficult. It wasn't easy before that. I found a lot of resistance to academic climate work before, but now it's become much more challenging. We have state governments, we have the federal government, which are cutting climate research funding. We also have a political atmosphere that is now just more challenging and risky to even say climate change. The current euphemism to use is sustainability, because sustainability is a wonderful rainbow-like term. It covers everything. You can't be against sustainability, but it is very challenging. And when I talk to academics, when I talk to faculty who teach and research climate change, when I talk to people in associations who are trying to support this, again and again, they're finding that the climate is, if you will, much more chilly, and much more risky to do. I've actually been censored before in writing about climate change. I have been told by multiple hosts for different speeches that I've been given to tamp down talking about climate change, and that nobody in academia has come out and said, "Well, it's not happening." They're not doing the Bill Gates new development of saying, "Well, it's overblown," or "We'll have a technical." They're not going to that at all. It's clearly political dread, which is making this difficult. But on the flip side, Bill McKibben points out that we have this consumer side revolution with solar power, where solar power is cheaper. It's more resilient than fossil fuels in a lot of ways. So we're simply, carrying this on. And there's also the fact that China continues to be the world's leader in renewable
Right.
energy, which is a fascinating topic. Michael Mann last year had this great pithy statement that with Trump's reelection, the US is becoming more of a petrostate, but China is becoming the world's first electrostate.
Hmm.
And that seems to be the case. So it's a vexed topic for higher education, but we need to be addressing it in colleges and universities. We need to be working on climate change right now.
Yeah, it's very troubling that you're being told not to talk about it. It's hard enough just to get people to talk about it. So preventing those who are is very foreboding. So, well, thank you for joining us. Really, thanks a lot, Brian. Great to talk to you. Great to see you. Um, so good luck
Thank
with
you.
all the work you're doing. We'll follow you on your Substack. Is there another place that you might tell people to watch for your work?
Well, you could look at my blog, bryanalexander.org. You could go to the Substack, which is AI in the Academy, or you could go to the Future Trends Forum, which is just forum.futureofeducation.us. Thank you, Sean, for setting up this project, which is terrific. Everyone should follow it. And thank you for being a great host, asking wonderful questions and being very patient with my ranting.
Well, thanks a lot. Great to talk to you. We will be taking the next 2 weeks off. Next week, Wednesday, as I mentioned yesterday, I'll be traveling to Puerto Rico for the American Studies Association conference. And the
Wow.
Wednesday after that is generally a holiday for most U.S. academics, as it's the day before the national holiday of Thanksgiving. So we'll return on December 3rd, 2025. We'll be continuing our discussion about AI and the remaking of culture. We'll be speaking with Reed Van Schnick about the use of memes, AI, and deepfake technology by the reactionary right to remake the world, and with Daniela Gatti, who is working on a queer theory of AI. I'll send out some reminders and an update as we get closer. Have a safe few weeks until then, and wish me luck on my border crossings.
Good
Um,
luck.
thanks. Again, I'm Sean Johnson Andrews. We've been joined by Bryan Alexander. Please check out my Substack at breakingculture.substack